Stanford Neurodiversity Project. Developing inclusive vocational education and resources for success in employment. Module 6. Addressing needs and concerns of employer and coworkers. The purpose of this module is to understand some of the barriers that employees with IDD may face with respect to employer and coworker attitudes and how these barriers might be overcome. This includes common myths or misconceptions, attitude assessment, testimonials. Section 1. Common myths or misconceptions. There are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to people with IDD in the workforce. When these misconceptions come from employers and coworkers, they can create barriers to equal employment of people with IDD. Here are some common myths people with IDD encounter in the workforce, as well as some facts and feedback that you could share with employers who are considering employing people with IDD.
Myth number 1. People with IDD are either completely incompetent or have superhuman abilities. There are a lot of extreme stereotypes about people with IDD. Sometimes people think that people with IDD are secret geniuses who can do complex math problems in their heads. There have been many TV shows and movies, for example, that use this trope, such as Rain Man or The Good Doctor. At the other extreme, sometimes people think that people with IDD have absolutely no skills or abilities. In reality, each person with IDD is unique and, like all of us, has both strengths and weaknesses. Stereotypes about people with IDD can lead to misunderstandings and difficulties in the workplace because they can underestimate or overestimate people's abilities.
Myth number 2. This person is not a good worker and has a bad attitude because they do not fit in socially. Even though workers with IDD may have a lot of skills and knowledge when it comes to the tasks of the workplace, they still frequently encounter barriers to getting and keeping a job. This is often related to the social side of work, such as certain social norms that the person with IDD may not understand. Sometimes people with IDD have different body language than neurotypical people. For example, they may not make as much eye contact, have a monotone tone of voice or other tonal differences, have differences in facial expressions, or may engage in conversation in a different manner. Additionally, sometimes people with IDD do not realize the priority that neurotypical people place on social engagement in the workplace. This can lead to a mismatch in priorities and communication styles. Misunderstanding and discomfort with neurodiverse communication styles can escalate to bullying and exclusion in the workplace, resulting in the person with IDD being the target of complaints, harassment, or isolation. Often this is based on faulty assumptions that neurotypical people make about the meanings behind a person with IDD's social or emotional expression. Instead of being distracted by how people with IDD are talking or presenting nonverbally, it is important to pay attention to what people with IDD are saying. Additionally, just because a person does not engage socially at work in the same manner as other people does not mean that they are not dedicated to their job or do not care about their colleagues. They just express it differently.
Myth number 3. Employers should only assign independent tasks to people with IDD because social interactions are too difficult, making people with IDD unable to work with coworkers or customers. Sometimes employers assume that people with IDD, especially autism, do not want to interact with other people because social interactions are too difficult. In reality, many people with IDD are very social and have wonderful customer service skills. They may want to participate in tasks that involve other people, such as coworkers or customers. Not assigning them to group tasks may hurt their opportunity to do good work or demonstrate their teamwork skills. It is important to communicate with the individual to see what types of work they are interested in and are comfortable doing, rather than assuming that they cannot or do not want to do a particular type of work.
Myth number 4. All people with IDD like repetitive work. One of the diagnostic criteria for autism includes restricted and repetitive behavior. This causes some people to assume that all autistic people and people with IDD in general only enjoy repetitive work. Like everyone else, some people with IDD enjoy repetitive work, whereas other people with IDD find it too boring or tedious. Ask the person what types of work they enjoy doing the most.
Myth number 5. People with IDD enjoy or should stay in the same level or type of work without promotion. Just because somebody has a disability does not mean that they should not have the opportunity to advance in their careers. Like workers without disabilities, some people may be content with staying in their same role, whereas others strive for promotions or new responsibilities. It is important not to make decisions for the individual with IDD, but to give them the same opportunities for advancement that their non-disabled coworkers have.
Myth number 6. It takes too much time, effort, money, and specialized training to incorporate people with IDD into the workplace. Sometimes employers are worried about how much work it will be to be inclusive of people with IDD. They might worry that people with IDD will have a meltdown at work and will disrupt business. They might believe that the only people qualified to interact with people with IDD are highly trained professionals with a special skill set. In reality, there might already be people with IDD in your workplace, and you don't even know it. It is helpful to have a basic understanding of IDD, but employers don't need to be psychologists or doctors to implement necessary accommodations or to listen to employees with IDD. And in the end, having a more diverse workforce and employing people with IDD can lead to a stronger workplace with greater productivity and more creative ideas. Most of these myths have to do with making assumptions about people, their abilities, and how they would like to be treated. Instead, it's a good idea to check in with individual people about their abilities and needs, rather than relying on stereotypes. When supporting people with IDD, it is also important to serve as an advocate to remind other people, such as employers, to not rely on stereotypes when it comes to those with IDD or anyone else.
Section 2. Attitude Assessment. Even though people with disabilities are protected legally under the American Disabilities Act, it's possible that, in reality, employers and coworkers do not always hold inclusive attitudes. It is important to know these attitudes ahead of time, so that people with IDD and their support people can best strategize about how to advocate for their needs. So how can you assess an employer's attitudes toward hiring people with IDD?
Handout 6.1 has a rating scale developed by researchers about prejudicial attitudes toward people with IDD. It includes both explicit forms of prejudice, as well as more subtle ones. What types of attitudes do you notice that you hold? What types of attitudes do you observe employers holding? What can you do as an advocate to help with other people's attitudes? If you are already working with a person with IDD who is employed, what types of problems do they tend to encounter in the workplace? If they are performing the tasks of the job correctly and are still facing difficulties, there may be issues with prejudicial attitudes or ableism in the workplace. Is the employee being treated fairly in terms of the opportunities they get in their job and career advancement? Is the employee being harassed, bullied, excluded, or repeatedly blamed for problems in the workplace? These may be signs that you need to make an action plan. Some options for how to address prejudicial attitudes from employers may include myth-busting about inaccurate stereotypes of people with IDD and providing more accurate information to employers about the benefits they can bring to the workplace. This may range from an informal conversation with an employer to a more structured disability awareness training from the Department of Rehabilitation or other advocacy group. Emphasizing the benefits of diversity in the workplace, which includes disability status. Having an honest discussion with the person with IDD you are supporting about these topics and collaborating on strategizing how the individual may respond in particular situations. For example, should the individual say something directly to a coworker, seek assistance from HR, or turn to a trusted friend?
Section 3. Testimonials. Next, we have a few brief testimonials from employers and professional supports about the benefits of integrating people with IDD in the workplace and the strengths that they can have.
We know diversity adds value to anything. So it brings in creative thoughts. It sometimes gets people unstuck because you have these different points of views coming. We need it in order to provide the best solutions. We need that outside thinking. So at DPR, we've always felt diversity was very important. From very early on in our initial tangible images, we wanted to have diversity in our senior level positions, and it was stated. Now we have our point of view where we want to respect the individual, and we want our workforce, both in the office and in the field, to reflect the communities that we build in. As I've learned more about diversity, I've learned that some diversity you can see and some diversity you can't see. Neurodiversity is typically not something that you can see, but it's something that you can experience. Some really creative companies have logos like Think Differently, and that has to do with the diversity of thought. And by having individuals that are wired a little bit differently and process the world a little bit differently than maybe you or me, it helps us build better, it helps us become better people, it helps us become a better society.
In a traditional internship, we normally have them work within our office or at a job site. In this case, we did have to work remotely. However, we were able to bring her into the San Francisco office so she could interact with some of her teammates as well and get to know what that corporate office feeling is like. When I started this program and internship with my counterpart, also Heidi Curiel, we had some expectations. We assumed how the process would go. But now that we are wrapping it up, it really opened our eyes to how people communicate and digest information differently. Our intern helped us to look at things differently. She really brought new ideas and new ways to approach things that is really valuable to us on our team.
Wouldn't it be incredible if we could use this untapped resource of different thinking across all of our companies, including at DPR, to help us grow, to become more empathetic, to see the world through a different lens, and to solve our problems in different ways? Maybe that's something that we need. So looking into how DPR could tap into this resource, we've partnered with the Stanford Neurodiversity Project, and they're helping guide us through how to interview differently, how to mentor differently, how to onboard differently, and maybe how to guide people differently so we can unleash the power of the mind in these individuals and reap the benefits both for the individuals and for us as a company, as for us as individuals within the company, we can grow better.
Here are a couple of more quotes from speakers of the career and employer panels at the 2022 Stanford Neurodiversity Summit. I cannot emphasize enough on how much neurodiverse individuals bring to the workplace. They bring a very different point of view to the same program. Detailed, nuanced, and working through all of the different ramifications and what-ifs. This is very valuable to companies and businesses that have to work the problems and problem-solving almost on a daily basis. We were fearful that we didn't know, that perhaps they couldn't follow direction, that we were just going to have no support, also, that we were just gonna have more work, you know. Those were the challenges we saw. And honestly, it's been the complete opposite.
As you can see, there are many benefits of integrating neurodiverse people into the workplace, and you may have to explain some of these benefits to employers when advocating for the individual you are supporting. In this video, you've learned about some common myths and misconceptions related to employment of people with IDD and how to assess and combat harmful attitudes. Additionally, you heard some examples of ways that employees with IDD can strengthen the workplace.